There's an old farming rule that used to get whispered from father to son across kitchen tables, right when a boy thought he knew better than the old man. Simple as dirt. Never finance tractors and equipment. Pay cash or don't buy. If you can't afford it outright, you can't afford it at all. By the early 1970s, that rule seemed laughable. Banks were begging farmers to borrow. Equipment dealers had financing so sweet it felt like free money. The USDA itself was screaming, "Get bigger or get out." But Warren Dutton, 71 years old, in 1973, stood in front of his three sons on a January morning, so cold their breath hung like fog. And he said it again: "Never finance tractors and equipment. I don't care what the banker tells you. The minute you owe money on iron, you're not a farmer anymore. You're a debtor working for the bank." His sons nodded politely. Two of them didn't believe him. One did. What happened over the next 7 years proved who was right in the most brutal way imaginable. 1973 was a golden year. Corn hit $332 per bushel, the highest in decades. Wheat topped $5. Soybeans went over $12. They called it the Great Grain Robbery Era, and farmers who sold at the peak made money like never before. Land prices exploded. Iowa farmland that sold for $500 an acre in 1970 was going for $1 to $1,500 by 1974. Banks saw this and threw money at farmers, telling them this was the new normal. Equipment got massive too. John Deere introduced the 4430 in 1972, 125 horsepower of diesel muscle that could pull implements the previous generation couldn't dream of. International Harvester countered with the 1066. These weren't upgrades. These were transformations. One man could farm twice the acres in half the time. The problem? The price. A new John Deere 4430 cost $18,500 in 1973. The average net farm income in Iowa that year was $22,000. That tractor alone cost nearly a year's profit. Add a plow, a planter, a combine, and you were looking at $60,000 or more. Very few farmers had that cash lying around, so they financed. 7-year loans at 8% interest seemed reasonable when corn was over $3 a bushel. The monthly payment on an $80,500 tractor was about $300. Manageable, everyone said. What could go wrong? Warren Dutton knew exactly what would go wrong. He'd started farming in 1925, right before the Great Depression. He watched neighbors lose everything in the 1930s because they financed equipment in the boom years and couldn't make payments when prices collapsed. He survived by farming small, spending nothing he didn't have, refusing to owe money to anyone. By 1973, he owned 480 acres of prime Iowa farmland, free and clear, plus equipment that was old but functional and completely paid for. A 1957 John Deere 720 diesel, a 1961 John Deere 3010, a 1955 John Deere 70. Nothing fancy, nothing modern, but nothing mortgaged. His three sons, Robert, 41, Michael, 38, and Thomas, 34, had all grown up on that farm. In January 1973, Warren called them together. He was getting old, he said. His hands shook, his knees hurt. He was dividing the farm 3 ways. 160 acres to each son, plus a share of the equipment. But there was one condition. "You farm it however you want," Warren said, standing in the machine shed, with winter wind rattling the tin roof. "But I'm telling you right now, never finance tractors and equipment. You want new iron, you save for it. The minute you owe money on machinery, you put a noose around your neck. All it takes is one bad year to hang you." Robert, the oldest, spoke first. Big man, confident, always pushing back against his father's conservative approach. "Dad, with all respect, times have changed. Corn's at $3, land's appreciating 20% a year. I can buy a new 4430, finance it over 7 years, and increased productivity will more than cover the payment. Warren shook his head slowly. "You're gambling that prices stay high and nothing goes wrong." Robert smiled, the kind of smile a son gives a father who doesn't understand the modern world. "Then I'll deal with it. But I'm not going to farm like it's 1940 when it's 1973. Michael, the middle son, was quieter. "I hear you, Dad, but Robert's got a point. We can't compete with 1950s equipment. I might need to finance something eventually." Warren turned to Thomas, the youngest. Thomas had always been the one most like his father, cautious, observant, less interested in what everyone else was doing. "What about you?" Thomas looked at his brothers, then back at his father. "I think you farmed for 50 years and never went broke. That's worth listening to." "I'm not financing anything." Robert laughed, not cruelly, but dismissively. "Suit yourself. We'll see who's farming more acres in 5 years." Warren didn't argue further. He divided the land and stepped back. And almost immediately, those choices diverged. Robert moved fast. Within 3 months, he secured a $45,000 loan. He bought a new John Deere 4430, a new 6-bottom plow, and a new 8-row planter. He also rented an additional 240 acres, bringing his total operation to 400 acres. His payment was $730 per month. At 400 acres planting mostly corn, he projected yields of 120 bushels per acre. At $3 per bushel, that was gross revenue of $144,000. Subtract operating costs, fuel, seed, fertilizer, chemicals, land rent, maybe $60,000, and that left $84,000 before equipment payments. His annual loan payment was $8,760, still left him $75,240. Seemed like a no-brainer. Michael was more conservative, but still financed. He bought a used John Deere 4020 for $12,500, financed $10,000 of it over 5 years. His payment was $210 per month. He also bought a used 4-row planter, total monthly obligation, $310. He farmed his 160 acres and didn't rent additional land. He thought he was being responsible. Thomas bought nothing. He took his share of the old equipment, the 1961 John Deere 3010, and some implements, and farmed his 160 acres the same way his father had. He spent spring and summer 1973 rebuilding everything, tore down the 3010, replaced every seal and gasket, adjusted the valves, rebuilt the injector pump. He went through the planter, replacing worn parts with pieces scavenged from junkyards. He welded cracks, fabricated bushings, painted nothing. Function over appearance. His brothers drove past his place and shook their heads. "He's wasting his time," Robert said. "That 3010 is 15 years old. It's never going to be what a 4430 is." The 1973 growing season was excellent. Robert's 400 acres averaged 118 bushels per acre. He sold at $2.85 per bushel. After costs and land rent, he netted about $70,000 before loan payments. After payments, he cleared $61,140. Spectacular. He bought a new pickup truck to celebrate. Michael's 160 acres averaged 115 bushels. He sold at $2.90. After costs and payments, he cleared $24,080. Solid, not spectacular, but comfortable. Thomas's 160 acres averaged 108 bushels. He sold at $280. His costs were dramatically lower. No land rent, minimal fuel consumption, conservative fertilizer use. Net $30,384. No loan payments. He cleared more than Michael on the same acreage with lower yields simply because he had no debt. But the euphoria of 1973 masked the trap that was closing. By late 1974, corn prices had dropped to $250 per bushel. By 1975, $220. By 1977, below $2. At the same time, input costs were rising. Diesel fuel went from 35 cents per gallon in 1972 to 55 cents by 1975 to 80 cents by 1979. Fertilizer prices doubled. And for farmers who financed equipment assuming high crop prices would continue, the math suddenly stopped working. Robert felt it first. In 1975, his 400 acres yielded well, 116 bushels per acre, but corn was only 2,015 per bushel. After operating costs and land rent, his net before loan payments was about $32,000. His loan payment was still $8,660. Then his new 4430 developed a hydraulic problem. The dealer's repair bill was $1,850. Suddenly, he was down to $21,390 for the year. Still profitable, but tight. Much tighter than expected. He'd gone from feeling like a genius to feeling squeezed. Michael, with his smaller operation and smaller debt, was more stable but couldn't expand. Thomas, with zero debt, was untouchable. His 160 acres netted $21,340. He made more than Michael again because he had no payments, and he was saving money, every year putting aside $8,000 to $10,000, building a cushion. Then 1976 brought weather problems. A late spring delayed planting. Summer was too wet. Fungal diseases hit corn hard. Robert's yields dropped to 95 bushels per acre. At $2,005 per bushel, he cleared less than $10,000 for the year. For a year of work, farming 400 acres with modern equipment, it was a wake-up call. But he told himself it was an anomaly. Next year would be better. Here's what was happening economically, and this is critical. Debt is leverage. In good times, leverage amplifies gains. But in bad times, debt becomes a fixed cost that doesn't care about your revenue. Robert owed $730 per month, whether corn was $3 or $2 per bushel, whether he had a great crop or a terrible one, whether his tractor ran perfectly or needed a $2,000 repair. The debt was inflexible, unforgiving, relentless. Thomas, by contrast, had complete flexibility. If corn prices dropped, he could cut costs. If he had a bad year, he could tighten his belt, skip some maintenance, plant fewer acres, whatever it took. He wasn't obligated to operate at a certain scale to service debt. This is what Warren understood from living through the Depression. Debt removed your options. It locked you into a treadmill where you had to keep running at a certain speed or fall off. And in agriculture, where you can't control prices or weather, that lack of flexibility is deadly. By 1977, Robert was feeling genuine pressure. Corn had dropped to $1, 98 per bushel. His net before loan payments was $20,000. After payments, $11,240. Then his 4430 needed a clutch replacement. The dealer quoted $2,400. Robert didn't have $2,400 in cash. He put it on a credit card and paid minimum payments for 6 months. Michael was hanging on, but barely. He started talking to Thomas about maybe selling some equipment, downsizing, getting out of debt. Thomas listened and didn't judge. He farmed his 160 acres, netted $90,681, and now had over $60,000 in savings. He could have bought a new tractor with cash. He didn't. He kept farming with the 3010, kept saving, kept watching. Then came 1979, and everything fell apart. Interest rates, which had been rising gradually as the Federal Reserve fought inflation, suddenly spiked. The prime rate hit 11, 5% by year's end, and would top 20% by 1981. For farmers with variable rate loans, this was catastrophic. Robert's loan was fixed at 8%, thank God. But when he went to the bank to refinance some operating debt, they quoted him 13%. "How am I supposed to pay 13%? He asked the loan officer. The young banker shrugged. "That's the rate. Take it or leave it." Corn in 1979 averaged $2.30 per bushel. Robert's net before loan payments was $25,000. After payments, $16,440. But he'd accumulated about $12,000 in operating debt. The credit card, a short-term note for seed, deferred maintenance. He was losing sleep. His wife was asking hard questions, and his father's words kept echoing in his head. Never finance tractors and equipment. Michael made a hard decision in 1979. He called Thomas and Warren and told them he was selling out. His debt wasn't crushing, but he could see where this was headed. Interest rates were rising, prices were stagnant, costs were increasing. "I'm not going broke," he said, "but I'm getting out while I still can." He sold his 160 acres for $1,850 per acre, paid off his equipment loans, and walked away with about $240,000 in cash. He moved to town and bought into an implement dealership. He was out of farming at 44 years old. Robert, proud and stubborn, kept going. He convinced himself he could outlast the bad times. But 1980 was worse. Corn dropped to $2.25 per bushel. A summer drought hit Iowa hard. His yields fell to 89 bushels per acre. Then the 4430 needed major engine work. A piston had cracked. The dealer quoted $4,800 for an engine rebuild. Robert didn't have it. He asked the bank for a short-term loan. They turned him down. He asked his father. Warren, now 78 years old, sat in his living room and looked at his oldest son with sadness. "I'll loan you the money," Warren said, "but only if you promise to sell that tractor and get out of debt." Robert's face flushed. "I can't sell it. I need it to farm." Warren shook his head. "You don't need it. You want it. There's a difference. You can farm 160 acres with a paid-for tractor and make money, or you can keep trying to farm 400 acres with debt and go broke. Your choice." Robert refused the loan on those terms. He found a high-interest lender who charged him 18% for $5,000 to fix the tractor. His debt spiral was now irreversible. By spring 1981, he was 3 months behind on his main equipment loan. The bank sent him a letter: bring the loan current or they'd repossess the equipment. He couldn't bring it current. In June 1981, the bank took the 4030, the planter, the plow, everything he'd bought in 1973. They sold it at auction for a fraction of what he owed. He still owed them $18,000 after the sale. He had to sell his land to pay it. He walked away with almost nothing after 8 years of brutal work. Thomas, through all of this, just kept farming his 160 acres with his old 3010. In 1981, he netted $23,472. He now had over $140,000 in savings. And in late 1981, when land prices finally started to crack as the farm crisis deepened, he did something smart. He bought Robert's 160 acres from the bank at a discount. He had $100 per acre, well below the peak, paying cash, no mortgage, no debt. He now owned 320 acres free and clear, and he farmed it all with the same 1961 John Deere 3110. Between 1980 and 1985, land values across the Midwest dropped by as much as 50%. Corn prices bottomed out below $2. Interest rates stayed brutally high. More than 235,000 farms went out of business. Farm foreclosures in Iowa alone increased by over 200%. This wasn't a recession. This was a collapse. The farmers who survived had one thing in common: low debt. It wasn't about being smarter or working harder or having better land. It was about not owing money when the bottom fell out. Thomas survived because he had zero debt and cash in the bank. When land prices dropped, he bought more land. When equipment prices collapsed at auctions, he bought what he needed for 20 cents on the dollar. Warren Dutton died in 1983 at 81 years old. At his funeral, Thomas gave a eulogy. He talked about his father's stubbornness, his refusal to change, his old-fashioned ideas. And then he said this: "My father told us never to finance tractors and equipment. 2 of us didn't listen. 1 did. My brother Robert lost his farm. My brother Michael got out before he lost everything, but left farming forever. I'm still here, farming the same way Dad did, and I'm going to pass this land on to my kids without a penny of debt on it." Dad wasn't old-fashioned. He was right. Robert, sitting in the back of the church, cried, not because his father had died, but because he knew Thomas was right. and it was too late to fix what he'd done. Let me bring this into modern context. Today, the average cost of a new high-horsepower tractor is between $400,000 and $600,000. A new combine can run $700,000 to $900,000. A modern farming operation can easily require $2 million in equipment. And yes, that equipment is incredible. GPS, auto steer, yield monitoring, variable rate technology. But here's the question Warren Dutton would ask. Can you afford it without financing? And if you can't, what happens when commodity prices drop, when interest rates rise, when you have 2 bad years? The financial principles haven't changed. Debt is still leverage. It still amplifies both gains and losses. It still removes flexibility. And agriculture is still a business where you can't control your prices or your weather. I've talked to farmers running $3 million operations on borrowed money who'll tell you straight up, if we have 2 bad years in a row, we're done. That's not farming, that's gambling. Now, I'm not saying nobody should ever finance equipment. If you're large scale, well capitalized, diversified, financing can make sense. But for the average family farm, for the young farmer trying to get started, Warren's rule still holds. Never finance tractors and equipment. Save for it. Buy used. Buy old. Fix it yourself. Keep your costs low enough that you can survive anything. The last time I talked to Thomas Dutton, he was 79 years old and still farming. I asked him if he ever regretted not buying new equipment back in the 1970s, not expanding, not trying to build a bigger operation. He thought about it for a long time. Then he said, "Every night I sleep fine. I don't owe anyone anything. My land is paid for. My equipment is paid for. And when I die, my son gets a farm with no debt. My brother worked just as hard as I did, probably harder, and he lost everything. What's there to regret?" Warren's old 1957 John Deere 720, the one he bought used in 1963 and ran until he retired, is still running, by the way. Thomas kept it, maintained it, and eventually passed it to his son, who still uses it for light work. That tractor is now 67 years old. It's outlasted the 40/30 Robert bought in 1973, which was scrapped after the bank repossessed it. The 720 is slower, less powerful, less comfortable, but it's still earning its keep, and it doesn't owe anyone a penny. What would you have done if you were one of the Dutton brothers in 1973? Would you have borrowed to expand, or would you have listened to the old man? Be honest. It's easy to say you'd do it right when you know how the story ends. But in 1973, when everyone was making money, when banks were throwing loans at you, when your neighbors were buying new equipment and calling you old-fashioned, would you really have had the discipline to say no? The best financial decision you can make in farming isn't the one that maximizes revenue in good times. It's the one that lets you survive the bad times. If this story meant something to you, hit that subscribe button. Share this with a young farmer who needs to hear it, especially those being told by dealers and lenders that debt is normal, that everyone finances equipment, that you can't succeed without borrowing. That's a lie. Warren Dutton proved it's a lie. Thomas Dutton proved it's a lie. And thousands of debt-free farmers operating today are proving it every single year. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.